Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue. Good morning, everyone. I will now call this meeting to order, and I want to point out, first of all, that it is International Women's Day, very important day in our community and throughout the world. I will also point out that it is Jeff Leeper's birthday today. Yeah. Happy birthday, Jeff. And with that, for those who are able, please rise for a moment of personal reflection. Thank you, merci. As we begin our meeting today, and on behalf of Ottawa City Council, I want to acknowledge that Ottawa is built on unceded Anishinaabe-Algonquin territory. The peoples of the Anishinaabe-Algonquin Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. The City of Ottawa honors the peoples and land of the Anishinaabe-Algonquin Nation and honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. I will now ask the council coordinator to please do the roll call.
Councillor Luloff.
Present.
Councillor Dudas.
Present.
Councillor Hill.
Present.
Councillor Curry.
Here.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Present.
Councillor Johnson.
EC.
Councillor Devine.
Here.
Councillor Bradley.
Here.
Councillor Tierney. Councillor Plant.
EC.
Councillor King.
Here.
Councillor Troster.
Here.
Councillor Leeper.
EC.
Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Menard.
Here.
Councillor Carr.
Here.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor DeRuse.
Here.
Councillor Brown.
Here.
Councillor DeRush.
Here.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Councillor Lowe.
Here.
Mayor Sutcliffe.
Here.
You have quorum, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Next, we have the confirmation of the minutes of the council meeting of February 22nd. Are the minutes approved? Carried? Any declarations of interest? We do have Councillor Tierney expressing his regrets. So motion to introduce reports. Councillor Daruz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, everyone. That the deferred report from the Planning and Housing Committee entitled Planning and Housing Committee Term of Reference, Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee Report 1A, Community Services Committee Report 1A, Environment and Climate Change Committee Report 1A, and the Planning and Housing Committee Report 4 be received and considered.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Daruz. Is that carried? All right, let's move to item 9, beginning with the Planning and Housing Committee terms of reference. Is that carried? Item 10 is the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee. Item 10.1, the terms of reference. Is that carried?
Carried.
The new zoning bylaw with revised work plan timelines. Is that carried? Okay. Item 11 is the Community Services Committee, beginning with the motion on physical distancing centers. And Councillor Carr, I understand you have a direction related to that?
Yes.
Okay.
You want me to read it?
Yes, please.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. Over the last couple days, just on part of the motions, there was a question on whether or not that the security piece should be a motion or a direction. I had the opportunity to visit a site yesterday, and so the direction is that staff develop a security plan to mitigate the impacts of the physical distancing centers and the neighborhood communities in consultation with impacted councillors to align with the city's authority within the approved budget envelope.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Carr. Did you want to speak to that any further, or?
Yeah, certainly. I had the opportunity to do a walkthrough of the Heron Road Physical Distancing Center yesterday, and to see the security measures that were in place. I have had colleagues around the table ask about that specific piece that Councillor Plant had brought forward and understand the reasons for it. But I think it's better as a direction to staff in light of seeing what's in place already, and making sure that staff don't have any additional work.
Okay, and is staff okay with that direction?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so discussion on that. And by the way, I also understand that some members of council would like a recorded vote on items 7 and 8 of the motion, or the recommendation rather. Okay, Conseiller Plante.
Yeah, just curious, have you reached out to the adjacent schools to Bernard-Grandmaite?
Mr. Mayor, the team is currently developing that plan, and reaching out to the schools is part of that plan. I'm not sure at this point in time if they actually had. I can get that information from staff and advise the councillor on that issue.
Okay, so you haven't reached out to the schools. Have you reached out to the Boys and Girls Club across the street?
Mr. Mayor, again, there is a plan for us to do the full consultation and engagement of the community, or advising them as to the supports that will be in place. The team is actively in that process right now. If you want an update on the details, I can get staff online and happy for them to explain that to you.
Okay, thank you.
Merci, Conseiller Plante. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning to you and colleagues. 2 questions. First is about the direction. If staff could just summarize their understanding of what the intentions are, for me, that would be good, because you can have an internal security plan of the actual facility for the temporary residents and our staff. You can also have an external security plan, which reference has been made to communities, but I just want to understand what is being asked here through the direction to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So my understanding of the direction to staff would be that it would contemplate an internal security plan for inside the facility. So how do we ensure that residents maintain safety in the facility, both for staff and for residents? For the outside perimeter of the facility, to ensure that the outside perimeter of the location is secure, and which includes things like having security 24/7, surveillance of those areas, as well as engagement with Ottawa Police Services and Bylaws services to understand direct access lines and direct access into the center should issues arise in that center, and so that they have an understanding of the types of services that are in that particular building, and any supports and priority of call or actions should they be required on that site.
Would you also consider as an opportunity to include, before a decision is made to use a center, to have a conversation with the local councillor, councillors, and community association representatives? And I raise this because when Jim Durrell was first contemplated for use of this purpose, which we welcomed, I found that the conversation with the community in advance to explain the situation, the need for physical distancing, the tenure, the duration that this center was going to be used helped alleviate some of the concerns in the community. And I think we would be doing everyone, all parties, a good service, if that was included as well in that plan. So I just want to raise that. My other questions about the actual motion, it's quite a lengthy motion, and I just want staff the opportunity to comment on the motion. Is there anything here that is a concern for you? Do you embrace the motion in its entirety? I just want an opportunity to hear from staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the direction addresses some of the concern that we had around the safety plan being extremely broad around what would be the mandate that staff could actually action. And the pieces that you spoke to, the consultation with the councillor and the community, is all part and parcel of developing those safety plans in consultation with the councillor. And I think Councillor Carr spoke to that when she talked about Heron Road and the opening of Heron Road and some of the discussions staff have been having with her directly as her center's opening. And with regards to the number 7, we did have a conversation at Community Services Committee around the criteria that were identified. And I think both Dan and I spoke, and Dan can speak to his portion from the recreation facility. But providing that detailed in report, really, it wasn't criteria, there wasn't scoring. What there was is a set of specific requirements needed to house vulnerable people in a particular facility and maintain their safety. So it was things like space to eat, space to physical distancing, space to put cots, safety of the location, showers, ability to park, ability to bring supplies in. And then it was fiscal considerations, what we had available in terms of finances, and then it was impact on recreation, current recreation programming. And so it really was more of an art than a science, where the teams went to facilities. Over 200 facilities were on the list of things for consideration, and then really did site visits and really thought, could we operationally and get that up in the time that we needed? So I think what we're struggling with is that it is the uniqueness of housing. It wasn't really scoring and distinct criteria. It was more needs and requirements.
Okay, but it's fair to say that you are comfortable with the motion that's before us today.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much, Mayor. I'm a little bit concerned about the line of questioning about the proximity of these centers to schools. As we know, lots of families experience poverty. There's people from all walks of life who use these physical distancing centers. I'm curious to hear from staff, because we've been running these centers for a while in other neighborhoods. Have there been significant security concerns? What has been the plan and how that's been dealt with? And whether you feel that this additional direction is necessary or would be helpful or not helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As was discussed at Community Services, we have been doing this since 2020 in terms of being in communities and providing alternate supports and respite services in communities. For the bulk of the time that we've been in, given the temporary nature, given the fact that we were in pandemic, the number of instances that we have actually had has been relatively low. But there have been, as you can imagine, they are vulnerable people coming into these situations in very difficult circumstances. And what we have been very successful at is working with our service providers to ensure we have very quick interventions to issues if they do arise, and make sure that people have the appropriate social supports to be able to reduce problematic behavior in or around the facility and get people the supports that they need. And some of that has been in some of the communities directly with community intervention, where communities are also playing an active role in supporting their community and identifying centers of issues that they're seeing in the community so that they can be addressed, and working directly with our neighborhood response teams, as well as the individual center staff and the people that are supporting the center. So I guess to summarize is that we have been doing this. We think we have been successful in mitigating risks and doing that in consultation and support of the ward councillors, and we would continue to do that in this case. So in that regard, we accept that direction and are happy to do that direction to staff.
Okay, Councillor Choster, anything else? Okay, thanks. Councillor Leeper?
Thank you very much. I don't have a question with respect to the motion. I certainly would invite the affected councillors to talk to me about some of the experiences we had in Kitchissippi Ward around the physical distancing center. I do want to make sure, though, that our staff are starting the work today with respect to some of the work around road services, cleanup, ensuring that the area is kept clean. I found when Tom Brown was being used that the cleanliness of the area needed a little bit of work, and that work was sort of started from scratch. So I want to make sure that that partnership internally is being formed immediately. And I also want to make sure that the community has 24/7 contact information to make sure that they know who to call if they have concerns. So a couple of things to make sure that staff are looking at as they move these services into other communities. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Carr? Councillor Carr?
Yeah, hi, sorry, thank you. I just had a clarification, and sorry, Mr. Mayor, I get a little confused with process now and then. We didn't hold the item, so are we discussing all aspects of the motions right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we are.
So would it be useful to talk about the other pieces then as well? Yeah, I just wanted to provide some context as a person who brought forward the first piece of the motion. In my community, I have hosted one physical distancing center for 3 years as of April, Dempsey Community Center, and I have hosted in between Jim Durrell Arena and Heron Road Community Center fairly consistently over the 3-year period. So I have had my facilities consistently occupied and no programming within those facilities. And as an example, in Dempsey Community Center, that community center is located between the OCH community of Russell Heights and the OCH Seniors Building at 1909 Russell Road. So the impact of the lack of programming in that center has been extremely detrimental. We had Christie Lake Kids that offered 13 programs to the youth in that neighborhood pre-pandemic. They offered food programs. Now they offer a couple programs a week at Overbrook, and they bus the kids to it. In Heron Road Community Center, of course, that's right next to the Heron Gate community. It also hosts a senior center. So my concern in bringing forward these motions initially was that we have gotten to a state where we have been relying on our community centers, and we're pitting the vulnerable populations against another vulnerable populations. And I think we can all agree around the table that's not how we want to work. What has been great about the physical distancing centers from my perspective is that, and I've had an opportunity to tour them, and is to see the wonderful lessons that we can learn and that can help guide us in the decisions that we make in the future. There are separate rooms with, 6 or 8 beds. There are students who live there that can't afford homes. There are people that are underemployed there that can't afford homes. These were set up initially to ensure that there was no spread of COVID in an overcrowded shelter system. But what it's given us is a model where people can access these centers at any time of day, where there's the wraparound supports. I found it strange when I was elected and I asked some of my council colleagues around the row, so do you know that they're in my buildings? And people are like, what are you talking about? And, we don't know. And what's really, a lot of people didn't know. And what's really interesting is that the city staff completely pivoted to a new model of care. They had to hire staff to basically deliver social services 24/7. They have placed 250 people since the start of the pandemic who are using physical distancing centers into housing. That is the direction that we need to move in. We need to invest more in supportive housing. And I just wanted to speak, because I feel that it's gotten lost and worried about the actual sites. I wanted to speak about what the actual goals are for us as a council in making sure that we have that exit strategy out of the community centers, so we're not pitting the vulnerable against the vulnerable. And I know Councillor King's motion with respect to keeping us informed of the statistics of the people that are in our transitory shelter system, whether in the families in hotels or motels, the people in the physical distancing centers, so that we can make the right decisions around the table, so that we can, and I'll let Councillor King speak to it, so that we can ensure that we spend our resources on purchasing buildings in the future, on working to make sure that people have supporting housing. And I just wanted to speak to make sure that that doesn't get lost, and that was the original intent of bringing the physical distancing centers motion. It's really laid bare the fact that we do have a crisis within the city, and that our city staff have worked really hard to make sure that everybody has a place to stay, and to make sure that you know, when the pandemic started, that we didn't have more people sleeping on the street, sleeping rough than we needed to. Anyhow, I just, since we're discussing everything there, I just wanted to pitch in and provide that context. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Just before we move any further, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions of staff, and maybe Don Herwire, you could speak to item number 8. Is there likely to be any additional funding available that would be redirected anyway?
Mr. Mayor, I believe.
Sorry.
I believe that is likely.
Sorry, I should have asked you that
for me to respond.
I apologize.
As written, we do not anticipate significant amounts of money being surplus from our operations. As you might expect, we've taken buildings that had budgets to operate 10, 12, 18 hours a day, and they're now running 24/7, 7 days a week. So by and large, the overhead costs to keep these buildings going are at least at what they were, and in some cases are a little bit higher. The other part is that we've lost all revenue for those buildings. For a building like Jim Durrell, that would be 2 ice pads at $300,000, $400,000 a year. So we don't anticipate huge amounts to be available. What we do expect is that we will have sufficient budgets when these buildings reopen to be able to provide a good introductory welcome back level of programming in the facilities so that the community can start using them again.
Okay, thank you, Dan. And a question about number 7, and Donna Gray, maybe you can answer this. How much work would be involved in 7A and 7B for staff?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It would be developing a report to committee and council. So it would be going back and kind of tracing back through all of the details of what we've done over the last several years and producing a report to committee and council. So the work to actually produce the report as well, when it doesn't substantially change the effort or the work that we have done to date or will do in the future.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kavanagh?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to my colleagues for their comments. We're clearly seeing a conflict that has come out. The pandemic has put a spotlight on it, but it was already there, of the need for multi-purpose space across the city. And this is for social services emergencies where things come up very quickly, such as hurricanes, and but also for the fact that we have a great number of people homeless. And it puts our recreation space in conflict with social services. This is not going away. I think that we need to look at a long-term plan, and I appreciate that the staff are supporting this motion. And I realize that it is a difficult situation because of the lack of space. And are we looking in our long-term plans at this trend? What we really want, of course, is affordable housing. I'll be the first one to say that. That's where we really need to put our emphasis. But what are we looking at for short-term emergencies? I know that that's come up more than once. And I'm getting pressure from community groups looking for at our recreation space and saying, can we have that for a food bank or whatever? So I know that it's just this desperation to deal with the here and now. But what is our long-term plan? And hopefully it involves a lot of community housing. So I guess that's a question to staff, and it's not quite the motion, but it's talking about, this is obviously the here and now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Councillor, you're right. I think coming out of the pandemic and the work that we're seeing in the social service sector and the growth in the social service sector and the needs, there is a big need for space. And there also is a great opportunity as we start to look at building affordable housing, but also as we're looking at growth in childcare and looking at use of space as we actually move forward in terms of how do we integrate whole communities as we're building affordable housing? How do we ensure that there's social supports in that? We're in the early days of actually understanding that as a social service sector, what that's going to look like. That's the work that the team has on their plan around what are the long-term needs and starting to do that plan, as well as what would be the financial and space requirements or adaptations to space requirements that we may have also as a result of change of the way that we're working, our mobile workers, our mobile space, and how we may have access to city space as well. So that is on the radar, that is a plan, but that's a longer term plan that will come at some point during this term of council.
Thank you very much. I think that's important for us to hear. We're looking at, a situation that has grown and grown, and it's not going away. And we do have, I think it's important for us to hear this, to hear what the long-term plans are so that we're moving away from these crises of recreation versus social services. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor King.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I must agree with what Councillor Kavanaugh said, that we have to really search for substantive, permanent solutions for people. And I want to thank Councillor Carr for her efforts to develop tangible options to transition unsheltered residents from city-operated physical distancing centers to permanent housing. Since April 2020, a total of 5 physical distancing centers have been opened as temporary measures to support efforts to reduce the overall capacity within the single adult shelter system and provide adequate space for users to physical distance and mitigate the spread of COVID-19. The creation of the centers were in response to the unprecedented increase in the numbers of unsheltered individuals and homeless encampments, which increased exponentially across the city. And I know that I saw a tremendous number of encampments in my ward. I'm sure that other councillors saw them as well. Many individuals who normally resided in shelters opted to live on the streets, citing personal safety and fear of exposure to the virus. In response to this emergency, the city worked collectively to develop and implement a strategic action plan to address the immediate short-term needs of unsheltered individuals. As we start to emerge from this emergency, it will be important that the city explore all alternative options and formulate an action plan to ensure that temporary emergency housing at recreation and community centers are ultimately closed with the objective of transitioning unsheltered residents to permanent housing. These series of motions provide staff the direction to do just that, to work on an action plan and develop tangible options to ultimately close these centers to give their occupants the safety and the dignity they deserve. It will be important that we align this plan with the Federal Rapid Housing Initiative, which was part of the motion that I sculpted, to ensure that we utilize this program that's designed to address the urgent housing needs of vulnerable residents through the rapid construction of affordable housing. These motions encourage the enhanced use of this federal program to reduce chronic homelessness and ensure that more Ottawa residents have a place to call home. These motions also ensure that council monitors and measures progress on a biannual basis to resolutely ascertain how many vulnerable individuals and families are gaining access to affordable, accessible, and supportive homes. It is important the city does all it can to transition as many unsheltered people to permanent housing as quickly as possible to improve the quality of life for those who need it the most. I'd like to once again thank Councillor Carr as well as the mayor, Councillor Dudas, in her capacity as chair of the Community Services Committee, for their work and support of these series of complementary motions. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that we're having this substantive conversation that reflects, that generally reflects the needs of our city's many residents, whether vulnerable or not, to have sufficient programming and services in good times and bad. And I also reflect that it speaks to the need of that we have to be properly resourced, and that the crises that we're facing are not soon abating. The only questions I have, so I'm generally supportive of the motion and what it's trying to put forward. I just for the sake of risk mitigation, if this motion is putting forward a transition away from the physical distancing centers, and I can completely understand the needs of those communities that have those distancing centers in their community centers to have them back. But if this is a transition back to full service at those community centers, does the fall target date, what I understand to be a fall target date, does that feel like it's premature? Do you have the time to I guess my question is that fall target date premature or too quick? Or is that sufficient time for you to make your transition away?
Mr. Mayor, that timeline is aggressive. We are pursuing every option that we have right now, from leasing to buying to space to temporary structures. We do feel with the options that we have in front of us that it is doable to be able to make a big transition out of physical distancing centers into August. But it does mean a number of factors have to convene in terms of, securing those spaces. We'll know better over the course of those months, but I can say it is a priority for our team. We're actioning that. I think what the councillor has been asking, or as part of the motion, is that we would come back in our report to committee and council in the Q2 to advise as to, if we don't make that date, what are the other options or mitigations that we would put in place, with some options for council to consider at that point. And at that point, we would be considering many of the things that Councillor Plante has included in terms of criteria that we considered around alternative spaces or sites, which some of them may be temporary as well.
Okay. Thank you. And with your acknowledgement that it is an aggressive timeline, and I can understand that it is an aggressive timeline, if these physical distancing centers were created to help, at-risk and vulnerable populations, will this change, or do you foresee that this change with this timeline, do you foresee that it runs the risk of perhaps putting those vulnerable communities back in harm's way in any way? Do you foresee that as a risk?
No, Mr. Mayor, I think that is a prime piece of our approach, is to ensure that anyone in our community who ends up in a situation where they do not have housing, that we house in a way that has dignity, respect, and where people are safe and cared for.
Thank you. And my third question to Mr. Chenier, and I think you kind of already alluded to it, when I had seen that part of the motion, item 8, was to reallocate unspent funds back into Parks and Rec. And I was going to be asking whether or not your staff and team have the capacity to spend those resources in 2023. Your answer to me was already like, what unspent funds? So I don't anticipate that you anticipate having that kind of problem of not being able to spend that money, correct?
Mr. Mayor, as I indicated, we don't expect very many excess funds. What we do expect is that each of the facilities that would be turned back to us would be ready and actively programmed, the day that they are ready. We will make sure that we have staffing capacity and that we have an initial offering for the arenas that will likely be, there's high demand, especially in the fall, for ice rentals. So we will include those, assuming that they will be back into the regular cycle for next fall and winter. For the community centers, we will likely focus on getting back to some of the core services those facilities offered, things like drop-in programs, children's programs, those kinds of things. All of that within existing budgets. If there is a little bit of a surplus, then that only allows us to enhance all the more, provide more hours, provide more days, those kinds of things. But as I mentioned, I think the overall accounting of this will show that we're not that far ahead in terms of extra resources.
Thank you, Mr. Chenier. Thank you, Ms. Gray. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Councillor Curry.
Very quickly, just on the motion itself. So my understanding is from listening to all of it is that so staff are supportive of the entire thing, 7, 8, and 9. So I don't know who's asking for a recorded vote, but really 7, you're saying, well, whatever, we could do that. We'll do that in another report. We can go back and look at that historical data. 7, 8 is, you probably don't have any money there anyways, but we can reallocate once we start bringing in revenue. And 9 is that you would do that anyway. Is that my understanding?
So 9, I think, has been replaced by the direction, effectively. Yeah, 9 has been replaced by the direction. Did you want to speak to that, Donna?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and we're happy to take that work to do. I think the question was, with everything that we have and the work we have on our plate, our priority focus is to get the sites and to get people into the sites. We're happy to do this report and to do this work. It's not going to change. You know, my preference is we keep staff focused on the task at hand, which is getting a preferable site and get them in. But if it's the will of council to have a report that looks back and establishes the criteria that we used, because there is concerns about that, we're also happy to do that.
So, Mr. Mayor, I always ask those questions because I want to know how much time that would take. If it's not super valuable and it takes staff time away, but I'm thinking if they actually think that data is valuable and would help them understand how to do things differently the next emergency, but if it's not valuable or it would take away time from something else, I want to know that.
Yeah, so that's what I'm hearing, I guess, is you'd rather be focused on placing people than on developing reports around the criteria for now.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that, Councillor Curry. Are there any other comments? So again, just to be clear, sorry. Pardon?
I have my hand up.
Why don't I see that? Sorry. Sorry, Councillor Lowe.
Might because my camera's off.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry, I didn't see that on my screen. Go ahead.
That's
please.
okay. It's a simple fix. I may have missed something. This is a clarification question. So will Grand Maître go back to being a rink in the fall? This fall?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that is the intent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. So just to be clear, I think the direction from Councillor Carr replaces places number 9 in the motion. So we're not voting on number 9. Regarding number 7, you know, as Councillor Curry highlighted, I think that creates work for staff that takes their time away from other priorities at the moment. I think that is important work that could be done later. And regarding number 8, it feels redundant to me that we'd be talking about reallocating additional funds when it's highly unlikely there would be any additional funds. So I'm going to ask that we vote separately on number 7 and then number 8. I'll be voting against those, and then we'll vote on items 1 through 6, which I think, which I'll be supporting, and I know many others will be supporting as well. So let's start with a recorded vote on number 7, please.
Councillor Curry.
No.
Councillor Judas.
No.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Councillor Leeper.
No.
Councillor Plante. Councillor Hill.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
No.
Councillor Kelly.
No.
Councillor Lulaf.
No.
Councillor Troster.
No.
Sorry, Councillor, was that no?
It was a no. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Carr.
No.
Counselor Bradley,
Yes?
Counselor Lowe,
No.
Counselor Devine,
No.
Counselor King,
No.
Counselor Kavanaugh,
No.
Counselor DeRush,
No.
Counselor Brockington,
No.
Counselor Gower,
No.
Counselor Brown,
No.
Counselor Tierney, Counselor Kitts,
No.
Counselor Johnson,
No.
Counselor DeRuse,
Yes.
Mayor Sutcliffe.
No.
3 yeas, 21 nays.
Thank you. So now let's do a recorded vote on number 8.
Counselor Curry,
No.
Counselor Dudas,
No.
Counselor Menard,
Yes.
Counselor Leeper,
Yes.
Counselor Plant,
Weep.
Counselor Hill,
No.
Counselor Hubley,
No.
Counselor Kelly,
No.
Counselor Lulaf,
No.
Counselor Troster,
No.
Counselor Carr,
No.
Counselor Bradley,
Yes?
Counselor Lowe,
No.
Counselor Devine,
Yes.
Counselor King,
No.
Counselor Kavanaugh,
No.
Counselor DeRush,
No.
Counselor Brockington,
Yes.
Counselor Gower,
No.
Counselor Brown,
No.
Counselor Tierney, Counselor Kitts,
No.
Counselor Johnson,
Yes.
Counselor DeRuse,
Yes.
Mayor Sutcliffe.
No.
8 yeas, 16 nays.
Thank you. So on the items 1 through 6, then, I don't know if we need a recorded vote on that. Is it carried? Items 1 through 6. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Moving on to item 12, the Environment and Climate Change Committee terms of reference. Is that carried? Item 13.1 is the zoning bylaw amendment from the Planning and Housing Committee for 6173 Renault Road. Is that carried? 13.2 is the official plan implementation. Is that received? Okay, next we have the bulk consent agenda. And I understand there is a technical amendment on 14.3.1. Is that right? So let's hold that separately. Is the rest of the bulk consent agenda carried? Okay, so on 14.3.1, Councillor Gower.
Yep, there's actually 2 amendments. The first is a technical amendment. Whereas the report recommends amending the City of Ottawa zoning bylaw to permit low-rise development on the lands municipally known as 1835 Stittsville Main Street. And whereas the current version of the report contains reference to only one of 2 new urban exceptions in the report's recommendations, and whereas a technical amendment is required to add reference to the second new urban exception to the report's recommendations, therefore be it resolved that Council amend Planning and Housing Committee report for item 1 by replacing the text of the committee recommendation with the following text. That Council approve an amendment to the zoning bylaw number 2008-250 for 1835 Stittsville Main Street as shown in document 1 to rezone the lands shown in area A from RU to R3Z XXX1-H and to rezone the land shown in area B from RU to R3Z XXX2-H, both to permit low-rise development as detailed in document 2, and therefore be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to section 3417 of the Planning Act as amended. And the second motion is a deferral of approving the zoning bylaw amendment. So whereas the report proposes a zoning bylaw amendment to permit development of a property located at 1835 Stittsville, Maine, and whereas the owners of nearby lands referred to as the Area 6 lands were required to provide for the extension of oversizing of urban services to 1835 Stittsville Main Street and are asserting that they have rights to seek contribution to the cost of construction of such services from 1835 Stittsville Main Street. Therefore, be it resolved that bylaw 1, a bylaw of the City of Ottawa to amend bylaw number 2008-250 to change the zoning of lands known municipally as 1835 Stittsville Main Street, be removed from item 21.1 on the agenda, motion to introduce bylaws, and therefore be it further resolved that city staff be directed to list the bylaw on a future council agenda for enactment only after being advised that the aforementioned issues have been resolved as between the owners of 1835 Stittsville Main Street and the Area 6 lands. So by brief explanation, we received a letter circulated to council identifying an issue, and staff have found a solution to this that maybe we should ask staff. The applicant is aware, and this resolves the issue raised by the third party, and the applicant is aware of this approach in front of us.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Tim, go ahead, please.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Mayor, this will allow council to carry the report, which authorizes the zoning, but the bylaw would only be brought forward after staff are satisfied that the concern expressed by the Area 6 Owners Group has been resolved.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Leeper.
Thanks. I just want to make sure this was the result of a last minute note that was circulated to council. Does the applicant concur with the approach?
Mr. Mayor, the applicant was actually prepared to see the item deferred entirely. This actually gets the report carried, but defers the adoption of the bylaw. So it moves it forward halfway down the field, Mr. Mayor.
Do we anticipate that the other landowner is going to concur with this approach as well?
Mr. Mayor, I have not spoken to them, but it protects their right. Council's not adopting the bylaw at this time, and if in the end something goes south, they will have their appeal rights, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Based on your experience, when should we expect to see something come before council in terms of putting this onto the third reading for bylaws?
Mr. Mayor, on that one, I would defer to planning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can't provide an exact date, but I think we're talking weeks, not months.
Weeks, perfect. Great. Thank you very much, and thanks for your nimbleness on that one.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. So on the first motion, is that carried? On the second motion, is that carried? And then on the recommendation as amended, carried? Okay, thank you. There are no in-camera items. So Councillor DeRuse, a motion to adopt reports, please.
Thank that the deferred report from the Planning and Housing Committee entitled Planning and Housing Committee Terms of Reference, Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee Report 1A, Community Service Committee Report 1A, Environment and Climate Change Committee Report 1A, and Planning and Housing Committee Report 4 be received and adopted as amended.
Okay, thank you, Councillor DeRuse. Is that carried? Motions of which notice has previously been given, beginning with the motion from Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much, Mayor. As we all know, it's International Women's Day today, and it's really unfortunate that I have to bring a motion forward about intimate partner violence, but it is an issue that affects so many women in our city. I recently learned that the #1 cause of homelessness among women in Canada is intimate partner violence. There was an inquest last June. The results came out into the 2017 murders of 3 women in Renfrew County, and that inquest made 86 recommendations to improve accountability, systems approaches, funding, and education to address the impacts and root causes of intimate partner violence. And the number one recommendation was to declare intimate partner violence as an epidemic. Lanark County Council did the very same thing last year. Recommendation number 10 says we need to encourage that intimate partner violence be integrated into every municipality's community safety and well-being plan. So our motion, the motion that I worked on with Councillor Kavanaugh's office, declares intimate partner violence as an epidemic and refers recommendation 10 to staff, and also would have us ask the province to declare intimate partner violence as an epidemic. After we tabled this motion, we received a letter from a coalition of frontline service providers who work on domestic violence, who shelter women, and who work on gender-based violence and intimate partner violence. In 2022, 52 women were murdered in Ontario. That's one femicide per week. In 2021, 90 homicide victims in Canada were killed by an intimate partner, and 3/4 of these victims were women and girls. Just one housing provider for women experiencing domestic violence, Interval House, they have to turn away 940 women seeking safe space just last year. 3 in 5 trans women have experienced intimate partner violence since the age of 16. So on International Women's Day, it's important to consider the broad spectrum of experience of gender-based violence that women experience and to redouble our efforts to end all violence against women. So I'm hoping we can all support this motion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much to my colleague and now the liaison on women and gender equity and LGBTQ strategy. This is a murder that shocked and sickened most of us when a man killed 3 women in one day. And it wasn't a surprise for many. That's the unfortunate part. What's made it worse is that intimate partner violence has increased exponentially during the pandemic when people were often trapped at home without their usual support networks. And it's not going away. This motion joins our voices with voices of cities and communities across the province who are acknowledging that violence is not private and it's not just a few bad apples. It's a systematic and pervasive problem. It's worst possible way of impacting families and communities. We can start by breaking the silence, by naming it an epidemic. So I ask that you support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Troster for bringing forward this motion. Certainly, as someone who just retired last year from a career where dealing with vulnerable populations is the raison d'etre for our focus. This certainly speaks to me, and as the father of 2 daughters who are, I want to inherit a better city and country than I have, I'm certainly keen to do what I can. What spoke to me this morning at the panel meeting was the talk about intentionality. And to that end, I'd like to issue direction to staff in a moment on some ways that I think the city can take some concrete measures to support this initiative, because my concerns are with the issue of kind of putting the issue on other institutions, and so that's my concern with this motion. But I think that there are some things that we can do to complement the actions being taken. But I do want to highlight a few statistics to go forward. In 2018, 1,168 partner assault calls to the city of Ottawa. In 2019, 1,257. In 2020, 1,086. In 2021, 1,237. In 2022, 1,177. That represents about 3 calls a day to Ottawa Police to deal with this issue. And obviously, any number above 0 is unacceptable. So certainly, I'm very proud personally to be working on the board of Crime Prevention Ottawa, and I think that there's room for that organization to provide some direct engagement on this issue. So I would ask Crime Prevention Ottawa, if we're good with direction to staff, one, are you able within your 2023 budget allocation to look at specific granting opportunities in order to address the reduction of intimate partner violence? Number 2, are you able to coordinate with the community and social services organizations and other partners in order to work together to address this issue? And number 3, are you able to report back through community and social services in Q4 on progress on this issue?
Thank you, Councillor Hill. 1 through 3, yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gray, do you have any comments on that as well?
Mr. Mayor, no, it would be a pleasure to do that. We've started a really valuable partnership, and I think this direction gives us clear direction to do some good work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that in mind, as I mentioned before, my concerns are with the external components to this, so I will likely be dissenting from that. However, I do appreciate the motion and will be supporting with the overall intent.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. So thank you again to Councillor Troster and Councillor Kavanaugh for your leadership on this. Is the motion carried? With one dissent? Right. Dissent on the second, therefore be it resolved. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Councillor King.
Thank you so much, Your Worship. Colleagues, I've introduced this motion seconded by Councillor Carr in response to a direct appeal by the Association of Municipalities of Ontario to ask the provincial government to formulate a serious plan to address homelessness. While much has been done by all orders of government to mitigate the worst impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on unsheltered residents, more action is needed to address the issue once and for all and to ultimately end homelessness. AMO believes there is an opportunity for municipal service managers to work together with the provincial government on a co-design process that is collaborative and solution-focused, emphasizing the potential for all government and a whole of government integrative approach that breaks down silos between orders of government, ministries, departments, and agencies. The process must leverage existing intergovernmental collaboration mechanisms using the National Housing Strategy as a platform, but producing a made in Ontario solution. Completely eliminating all homelessness is a bold and ambitious goal. However, we can strive towards the achievement of a functional zero standard. Through enhanced provincial and federal government support during the midst of the pandemic, our city experienced some modest success in reducing family homelessness. In 2020, Ottawa declared a housing and homelessness emergency. When a baseline was set for chronic homelessness in Ottawa that year, there were 928 chronically homeless family members in the city. In May 2022, that number was reduced to 617 chronically homeless family members. That 20% reduction in family homelessness played a major role in the overall reduction of chronic homelessness in the city. The reduction in family members experiencing chronic homelessness was a result of multiple factors. The city added resources to its Housing First program that supports families moving from shelters to housing. Additionally, the city focused on finding and securing housing for families as quickly as possible when they arrived at a shelter. But most importantly, various provincial and federal policies and programs implemented during the pandemic led to a reduction of people accessing the shelter system. This demonstrates that substantive progress is possible, but continued progress requires a substantive plan and substantive investment from the provincial government. The pandemic demonstrated the continued need to enhance collaboration and investment. It therefore is incredibly important that we encourage the co-development of a plan of action between Ontario's municipalities and the provincial government to end chronic homelessness in our city and throughout the province. Such enhanced coordination would benefit the city in its quest to address individual homelessness, the close of physical distancing centers, and transitioning unsheltered residents to permanent supportive housing. Since the city cannot achieve this objective alone, the motion encourages the collaboration necessary with our key partner, the provincial government. Therefore, be it resolved that City Council call on the provincial government to urgently, one, acknowledge that homelessness in Ontario is a social, economic, and health crisis. Two, commit to ending homelessness in Ontario. Three, work with AMO and a broad range of community, health, Indigenous, and economic partners to develop, resource, and implement an action plan to achieve this goal. Therefore, be it further resolved that a copy of this motion be sent to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the Minister of Children, Community and Social Services, the Minister of Health, and the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor King. Any comments? Is the motion carried? Thank you. Conseiller Plante has the next motion, and I understand you have a couple of minor revisions to it.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Maire. I also want to thank the Ontario Medical Association and the Canadian Association of Family Doctors who reached out to me about this. Essentially, very thrilled that we are looking at our medical notes at the City of Ottawa and how we can better streamline them so doctors can get back to doing what they want to do, which is attend to patients and not doing paperwork. There's one small change. Just the very first, therefore, be it resolved now reads that the city manager be directed to work with human resources to review processes and collective agreement language in all departments that require medical note or form and identify where requirements for medical notes or forms can be eliminated or simplified and report back to council as soon as possible. Merci.
Merci, Conseillère Plante.
Over the last 3 years, many have been left with lingering anxiety, mental health problems, and physical health impacts. We have to remember, we can't forget. This motion was actually initiated by a resident in Bay Ward who lost her mother during the pandemic and is still continuing to feel the impacts of this loss. I think many of us have stories. The federal government has named March 11th as National Day of Observance to commemorate the people who lost their lives and significant impacts we have all felt because of COVID-19. It is the day that the World Health Organization named COVID-19 as a pandemic. I don't think any of us will forget where we were when we saw that happen. Resident asked if our city could do the same to recognize the local impacts for people of Ottawa. We got a stark reminder of the importance of a robust healthcare system and how important Ottawa public health is to us. And we are indebted to the public health and civil leaders and frontline workers who took us through the pandemic with wisdom, calm, compassion, and solid advice based on science. This motion is to allow us to pause and acknowledge the immensity of what we've been through. Hopefully the public recognize that this will give people permission to seek help for the impacts that they still suffer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh.
Okay.
Is the motion carried?
Carried.
Okay, next up is a motion from Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I read it out at the last meeting. I don't think I need to repeat it, but just by way of introduction, we had a really great presentation at ARAC on the financial barriers that artisan wineries in Ontario are facing when it comes to being able to sell their products to a licensee. So that would be, selling directly to a local restaurant, for example. VQA winery after tax receives 80% of the revenue for a bottle of wine sold directly to a licensee, but a non-VQA winery only receives 52% of the revenue. So quite a large discrepancy. Councillor Brown and I have been approached by wineries in our area. I have Domaine Perot in Navan and Vignot Claude Duvally, and Councillor Brown has Jabulani in Richmond that are being impacted by this. And as councillors in a rural area, we want our rural small businesses to thrive, and these wineries are an important contributor to the city's agritourism sector as well. So this issue is getting broad support. It's not partisan, and I hope you'll support it. Thank you. I can read out the therefore be it resolved that the mayor, on behalf of council, write to Ontario's Minister of Finance, Minister of Red Tape Reduction, Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, and Minister of Tourism, Job Creation and Trade, supporting the elimination of the LCBO markup and wine levy on direct delivery of 100% Ontario non-VQA wine to a licensee. And be it further resolved that the mayor provide any updates to City Council or any progress or responses received regarding this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kitts. Is the motion carried?
Carried.
Oh, a couple of people dissenting. Councillor Devine, Councillor Dudas, anybody else? Okay, thank you. Next motion is from Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This motion is about about aging at home services. Bay Ward has the large population of seniors in the city, but there's seniors across Ottawa who have, and we need effective agency support for seniors who want to age at home as long as possible. This motion is about increasing health and quality of life supports for people while they're still at home. It is not wanting to replace or divert funds from long-term care. It's about playing an important role of preventative so people can stay in their homes longer. The Oasis project that is being piloted in Bay Ward is just one example of a naturally occurring retirement community, or a NORC for short. They are part of a full continuum of community-based programs for seniors. They work because they bring services to support social connections and healthy lifestyle to people where they live. A strong system of community-based supports for seniors is cheaper for the taxpayer and complements the healthcare system by helping to take some of the pressure off the long-term care waiting list. It's a key part of the comprehensive, evidence-based, forward-thinking, affordable healthcare for older adults. I hope you'll support me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Is the motion carried?
Carried.
Okay, Councillor Troster. And understand with Councillor Tierney not here, he was the original seconder of the motion. So Councillor Troster.
Yes, I understand Councillor Leeper is going to second this, although I don't know where he is. Oh, there he is. This is just to close Bank Street for the Fire and Ice Festival. Carried. Amazing. Come join us. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. I just got handed a jug of water. I didn't think the meeting was going to be that long, but thank you. Okay. So that's it for the motions of which notice had previously been given. I just wanted to clarify something regarding the direction that Councillor Hill had presented earlier. So just for the sake of clarity, we'll put that on the screen so that everybody understands what the direction was. We're able to put that on the screen. And just to be clear, this does not change or affect the motion from Councillor Troster, which was carried. It is supplemental to that. Is that okay with everybody? Just to be clear? Okay. Good. Thank you, everyone. All right. Notices of motion for consideration at a subsequent meeting. Councillor Dudas.
Is it possible to put it up on the screen? I'm happy to start reading it. I just can't recall which one of mine comes first because I've got two.
Oh, so it's the commemorative tree motion.
Cool.
Go ahead.
So I'll start reading it. And this is seconded by Councillor Johnson. Whereas the Ottawa branch of the Polish Combatants Association, branch number 8, has celebrated its 75th anniversary. Whereas the original members of branch number 8 were former soldiers of the Polish armed forces who fought alongside the Western Allies, including Canadians, during World War II. Whereas in the last 75 years, branch number 8 and its members have made immeasurable contributions to the community and to our city. Whereas branch 8 has worked with the city staff to find a location for a tree to be planted at Centrepoint Park to commemorate this milestone anniversary in the spring of 2023. Whereas the financial cost of the commemorative tree and the accompanying plaque will be borne by the Polish Combatants Association, branch 8, whereas Public Works, Parks, Maintenance, and Forestry Services will install the city standard flat black polished granite marker flush to the ground. Therefore, be resolved that the City Council approve the installation of a plaque in Centrepoint Park to mark the 75th anniversary of the founding of the Polish Combatants Association, branch number 8, and there further be resolved that the plaque read, "This tree was planted to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the founding of the Polish Combatants Association, branch number 8, in Polish, English, and French." And I was going to attempt reading that in Polish, but that wasn't going to go off so well. I was going to try. Yes, I was going to have.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas, and you have a second notice of motion as well.
Yes, absolutely. And this is seconded by Councillor Bradley. Whereas on February 6, 2023, an incredibly destructive earthquake, 7.8 magnitude, followed by a series of strong tremors and aftershocks, devastated southeastern Turkey. Whereas the earthquake has already killed more than 41,000 people and injured more than 87,000. Whereas more than 1 million people have been displaced, with at least 47,000 buildings destroyed or damaged. Whereas the Canadian and Turkish Women's Association in Ottawa are organizing a fundraising event to benefit the victims of the earthquake on April 23rd, recognized as Children's Day in Turkey, to sell donated used goods, Turkish foods, and to host children's activities. Whereas the Canadian Turkish Women's Association in Ottawa is seeking the use of Jean Piggott Hall at City Hall to host this fundraising event in support of residents. Therefore, it be resolved that Council approve the use of Jean Piggott Hall for this fundraising event on April 23rd and waive the rental fee and associated costs for furniture, equipment, and staffing to support the people of Turkey following this devastating event.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas. There are no other notices of motion that I'm aware of. So item 20 is a notice of intent. There is a notice of intent from the Light Rail Regulatory Monitor and Compliance Officer to present the annual report to the April 13th meeting of the Transit Commission, following that to City Council on April 26th. Motion to introduce bylaws. Councillor DeRuse.
Que le règlement énuméré à l'ordre du jour sous le titre Motion portant présentation de règlement.
That the bylaws listed on the agenda under motion to introduce bylaws 3 readings be read and passed.
Confirmation bylaw. Councillor DeRuse.
Que le règlement suivant soit lu et adapté. Règlement ratifiant
That the following bylaw be read and passed to confirm the proceedings of council meeting of March 8th, 2023.
Is that carried? Are there any inquiries? Okay, Councillor Leeper, for your birthday, we all pitched in and got you a short council meeting. Happy birthday. Motion to adjourn. Thank you, everyone. Merci beaucoup.